Joe, welcome to the Compete Everyday podcast.
What is up? Thanks for having me.
Man, looking forward to this. For background on everyone, if you followed Compete Every Day, you've seen us do some collaborations with Go Brewing. You've seen us do a promotion back in March. We did another one this summer and have one coming up here again this fall. And so I've been familiar with the brand, had the products, loved the products. And when I was in Anaheim back in May, I just swung by the Go Brewing booth, got talking to Joe. Turned out Joe's founder. And so kind of started hitting it up, talking a little bit about it. And so over the last month or so, I was like, hey, man, I'd love to get you on the podcast to talk about the brand, not just because like we love it, we promoted it at Compete, but it's a really good product. And your approach is really unique with a tasting room and everything else that you don't traditionally think about with a non-alcoholic beer. So let's dive in a little bit of where did this idea for Go Brewing even originally come from?
It stemmed from a challenge I did very similar to Dry January, where my wife and I abstained from alcohol for a period of time. And what I realized quickly is I'd been under the cloud of alcohol to some extent for decades of my life. And even though I was drinking only a couple nights a week, there hadn't been really a week that went past that I hadn't had something. And during this challenge, after 30 days, I start to feel this. I started to get this mental clarity, and also all these physical manifestations that I just didn't expect. One was I had less anxiety. Second, I had these bags under my eyes that were just like gone, and I thought they were perpetually there. I started to lose a bunch of weight. I was way overweight, and that led to better eating, and all these good things started to happen. And I was like, man, there's just something here. But that didn't stop these crazy cravings that I had and I built up over decades of drinking, mainly on like 5 p.m. when or on weekends. And wasn't the type, and alcohol is very personal to many, many people. And there's a lot of people that struggle. For me, my struggle came at the end of the day. In the morning, I'd be like, I'm not drinking today. And at 5 o'clock, I was like, man, I really want a beer. And then I started to justify deserving a beer and deserving a drink. And then the problem I had is once I had one or two, my decision making went out the window. Like I just made bad decisions. I ate a burrito. Next thing I know, a year or two later, I'm 40 pounds overweight. So after that time period, I really found that the only thing that helped curb my craving was non-alcoholic beer. And at the time, there wasn't that many options in the market. There was a couple of brands you see today. But the catalyst was a few things. One was that I'm like, man, there's something here. Then the other catalyst was I was having this small conference, the seminar, and a guy named Rich Roll was there, who's a prominent podcaster, and his book really inspired my life, Finding Ultra. And at the end of the conference, I didn't want to hand out alcoholic beverages because one, Rich is sober, and secondly, it just didn't fit with what we were doing, which is really about health and wellness. So I handed out a non-alcoholic beer, and I was like, man, I know I could do this, but I didn't know anything about making beer. So really kind of led me on a adventure of figuring out how do I jump into this industry that I know nothing about. The only thing I knew about craft beer is I was good at drinking it, and build something that not only helps me, but helps other people curb their cravings, because I felt like other people were in the same boat as well.
So a couple of things. What was the timing on kind of y'all's decision to have that kind of 75 days no alcohol, and then the catalyst of when was Rich's event?
Yeah, so the 75 days, it's funny because my wife and I backed into Thanksgiving of 2020, and we were like, okay, let's back
Okay.
up 75 days because then at Thanksgiving we could celebrate and we could have wine and we could eat whatever we want. And it was part of the 75-day hard challenge, if anyone has heard of that,
Yep.
which is just a bunch of mini challenges within a big challenge. And it's hard. On the surface, it seems easy though. But the hardest for me was abstaining from alcohol. So it was around that time frame. And then at the very end of 2020, actually it was 2021, earlier in 2021, I'm trying to remember the date. I had this conference called GO, aptly named GO. And that's when Rich came out for it. And that's when kind of everything started to connect for me. And on a side tangent, like I really look at signs from the universe to guide me to where I'm going, and I try to be like really open-minded. And what happened is I had a big marketing and software business, and we had 35,000 square feet. Well, I had been acquired by another company that wasn't far from us, that was in downtown Chicago. So we were going to still keep some of that office, but we certainly didn't need 35,000 square feet post-COVID. So we subleased 20,000 square feet. Well, we subleased that to a cidery. That cidery was where our current facility is. So I went to that cidery and I was like, what are you guys doing with your current space? And they said nothing. And what I knew about the space is it was adjacent to the most popular brewery in our city. So I'm like, well, at least I can start building traffic off of them because people are going to drive by and be curious of what this new brewery is. And that was the whole reasoning why why we started where we did, because as you build something, you really look at, or I look at like, okay, here's the level that I need to get to. And level one was just awareness, community, like how do I get in front of the local people? And the best way to do that is to piggyback on another, the same parking lot that people were going to anyway.
Yep. Very interesting. So, and so your background, obviously, nothing you talked about, nothing knowledge around anything on beer from doing it. So, take me through some of the early days of testing and trying and trying to make something that was different that you liked. Because as we both know, some of the early days, like the non-alcoholic drink, it's kind of like, I laugh. It's like the early days of protein powder, like when I'm in high school, like pinch your nose, take a shot of it because you need it. Whereas y'all's products have phenomenal flavors and diverse flavors as well. So take me through some of this evolution on your side with that, the batching and the flavoring.
So as soon as we decided to move forward, I say we as like my wife and I, she was the final decision maker in this. So when I was like, I have this idea, and it was kind of keeping me up at night. And again, all these things started to happen. And I will say too, my father succumbed to alcoholism in 2006. My brother had massive issues in his life, and I was just surrounded by it. So I knew I was prone to go down a not so good path. So she knew that as well, and knew that I just really believed in the idea. So once that happened, I was like, well, there's no point to get too far unless I find a brewer, because yeah, I can learn to brew, but I'm not going to learn how to brew non-alcoholic beer in any sort of reasonable time frame. So I posted a job out there for a brewer without even having a business or anything. I wanted to see what would happen. So I'm like, okay, let's start there. And eventually found someone who's now a partner of mine at GO. His name's James Bigler. And really, I didn't even know what to ask him, to be honest with you, Jake. I was just like, I didn't read a ton of beer books. I just kind of took my knowledge of interviewing and hiring 800 some people, or being around them in my last company, to just develop gut feels for folks. And that sounds crazy, I know, but like, I was like, all right, well, the worst that can happen is I hire him and we're going to take over my garage and make it into a brewery. And if it doesn't work out, then we don't take that next step, or I find another brewer. And luckily he's been incredible. So we started off in the garage. My wife's Tesla went out, and where that control panel was became a control panel for a small brewery. And we just started to go at it. And I say we, I mean like James mainly. It was far less me. I was like working on, now I'm like, okay, maybe we should work on the business side of things. And the one thing about NA, which gave me comfort, because I also didn't know about retail, I didn't know how to even get in stores. I knew I could sell it online. And that is the thing I knew. And and I knew how to build a brand because I did it before. And I knew that, I knew like all those things that are important other than the product. But what I was very focused on is we need to have the best product on the planet. Our mission from day one was to make the best NA beer on the planet, period. And I'm a big believer in, you take away excuses from people. So I said, what do we need to do this? I don't want to get to a point where a year down the road, you're like, oh, well, it would have been good if we only had X. I go, no, give me what that X is, and let me work on it, and let me get you that equipment. So, but of course we didn't have that in the garage. But in the garage, we were just making batches and batches and batches, and we settled on 5 core flavors that we wanted to launch with. Also along the way, James is like, hey, we really need a lab person because quality and safety are paramount with non-alcoholic beverages. I was like, okay, like, I didn't know. I was learning very
Yeah.
rapidly. And then, now we had this lab person, and serendipitously, a friend of mine had a brewery here that had closed down, and he had worked with a lady who was a consultant that wrote the book on beer quality and beer management, literally wrote the book on it, and was like, you should call Mary. And part of me was like, I should call Mary because I don't know if everything that's going on in here is going to get us to the goal, or if I just, feel the team's really, excited about this and they're telling me what I want to hear. So anyway, bringing in this lady, Mary Pelletieri, she comes in there and she's coming to my garage too. So now my wife's taking the kids to school and a bunch of people are in the garage and we're, we're just brewing beer every day. And it took hundreds of trials, man. This was the latter of 2021 and then all of 2022. And then toward like probably at the end of Q1 22, we started working on the plans to build the physical brewery. And I was so naive, like I didn't know how to model things. I didn't know anything. I've learned so much since. And that's kind of how we went about it.
What's fascinating, so there's a couple of things that's fascinating to that story from me. The first is like you were true hustle, bootstrap, build, grind after having had a ton of success and having a company that gets acquired. Like most people aren't doing it. Most people are, let me enjoy the easy path, or let me do something where I don't have to work as hard after having this level of success. Talk to me about where, I guess, that work ethic or that drive that you have came from. Where did you learn that? Where did you forge that throughout your life that prepared you for this point?
Man, if you looked back in my life, and I would not be the person you'd put on any sort of like yearbook to say I was the most likely to succeed. I was probably the least. I was a bit of a, my parents got a divorce, not to get in the weeds. My parents got a divorce when I was young. I had my own apartment in high school, and I got a girl pregnant when I was a teenager. I couldn't even take care of myself. And fortuitously, I ended up on the Chicago assembly line building cars. And I only got the job there because of her parents and her family members and friends of mine that worked at the plant. So everyone I knew had worked at this plant, and that was like the really kind of where I saw like my life going. It's like I'm going to be at the plants, and that's my life. Well, when I got there, I realized that I didn't want to be there forever, but I didn't really have any way out. And what I found is the only way out is through, and that is through going to school, through trying to take advantage of what the plant had to offer. And I started making better decisions. And the first decision I was like, well, I'm working at night, so I'm going to go to school during the day. And slowly but surely, I would bring in my textbooks to my job on the assembly line at the 1998 Ford Taurus. And I would put on the B pillar, the scuff plate, all these parts that the cars would drive by. And I would read 15 seconds at a time in between putting on those parts. And I did that for 5 years and finally got out of the plants. And that is where I developed a work ethic, because I realized that I had the power to control my own destiny. It was these small things that I had to do over a 5-year period, 8 to 10 hours a night, 72 times per hour, that led me to graduate magna cum laude. Really, like, there's no way on paper I would ever have been able to do that. And if I would have followed a traditional path, there's no way I'd be talking to you today. So I took the cards that life dealt me, and then I started to really see things in a different way. And it changed my life. And now my daughter's 25, the one that I had when I was a teenager. So you could kind of do the math on how old I am, and she's thriving. And I look back at pictures and I'm like, I can't even believe you survived. Like, I was such an idiot. But, like, we're all handed these things in life, man. And I'm just so lucky I was able to like see it for what it was and like take those small steps.
Was there ever a point where you considered just screw it? Like, this is too much, this is too hard, let me just go through the motions and do what everybody else does?
Dude, all the time. I I had so many issues and so many things were against me. I felt they were against me. I felt everyone was against me. And that was part of the issue. And I'll say quick before I tell you this story that everyone at the plant spoke in this language of like, we have 30 years. 30 years we can retire. And you can't get through an introductory meeting with anyone there without saying, how long have you been here? And how much time you have left, right? And it's pretty easy to do the math. You've been there 5 years, you got 25 years left. And we were all like human robots, conditioned like this was the only way out. And when you looked at people, like that's what they did. Like you didn't see a lot of movement. So I started to envy supervisors and like all these people at the plant, and that really, during my breaks, instead of commiserating, I would go talk to the managers and I'd be like, how do I get off the line here and be you? And that was like my dream because that's all I saw. I'd schedule meetings with a plant manager and present him like marketing booklets on things that had nothing to do with anything that he was overseeing, but I was just like trying to like grasp at straws. So I graduate college after many times of like, thinking like, is this even worth, is this even worth it? And this engineer calls me over to his desk, one of the guys I would pester on a daily basis. Like it got to the point where on breaks, they would kind of hide from me because I would go up to them constantly being so eager to ask them like, how do I get off this line? Like I just graduated. And I was sitting there with such a negative attitude because I'm like, man, I put in all the work. I did everything I should have done, but I'm not moving anywhere. So this guy calls me over. He's like, Joe, check out my computer. This is like a bigger box computer. This is like the early 2000s. And he points to a job and it was for Ford's marketing and sales division. And it was in this nearby city. And I was like, what? Like there's a marketing and sales division in the Chicagoland area? And he's like, this is what sounds perfect for you. And it like was basically like exactly what I wanted, like my dream job. So he's like, you should apply for this on your next break. So I'm on my next break. I go over there and I can't stop thinking about it. I'm not studying now. I'm just thinking about, oh my God, like my dream job is on that computer. And I'm going to go apply for this on my break. So I run over there. Willis lets me use it. And I'm applying for this job, put in all my stuff. And the last question was, what's your Ford salary ID number? And I was like, I'm not a salary employee. I could not apply for that job. So, Jake, I walk away and I'm sitting there like, maybe not physically crying, but inside screaming. Like, I did all this. I found my dream job. This is going to limit me. And I started to like have such a negative attitude. And then something switched. Turned back around. I go back to Willis and I'm like, Willis, can I use your ID number? And then call out that I'm not you. And Willis is like this 5'6" Asian gentleman. We look nothing alike. Not that there was pictures back then that we were sharing, but it was just like, it was kind of humorous. So then he's like, okay. So he allows me to submit this application as him. And 2 days later, I get a call and got an interview and I'm getting the job. And it would have been so easy, man, to turn that other way and keep going. But that changed my life.
I love just the creativity to not allow that to stop you, which obviously that makes sense, right? You're looking at how do I still get there? As frustrated as I am, man, it sucks I don't have an ID. Willis, can I use yours? I mean, that's a similar line of thinking of how do I still enjoy a beer without having the fog of alcohol and that relationship with it? Same type of thinking of how do I get what I want without allowing this roadblock to stop me? That's a really cool story. And obviously we can see pieces of that and that perseverance. And that makes complete sense with the work ethic and your team. I mean, heck, you were in the booth at Anaheim hustling with your team, which I can very much relate to. But that's something not a lot of founders and co-founders want to do after their first year, right? You want to have a team go do it. You need to work on bigger things, but you're still there interacting with people. So I just appreciate that drive and very much find some kindred spirit in that. One of the things you mentioned that I would love to hear about is you talked about this fog that was over you this with alcohol. But if I'm correct, you still today will partake alcohol. It's not like you've gone
Mhm.
completely sober lifestyle. So talk to me about how that dynamic has changed now. And I would say in the same token, how do you balance being the founder of an NA beer company, but also saying, hey, I still will enjoy some alcohol?
Man, such great questions. Thank you for asking me those.
Yeah.
So it was about 3 years ago, and I'm coming home from a business trip. Like you're traveling like crazy. So imagine you're coming home, your plane lands, you're going through your airport, you're trying to get to your car as fast as possible. I stopped at the bar on the way out, and I pounded like 2 pints of beer. And this time I wasn't driving, I was getting a ride, and my ride was 15 minutes late. What a great excuse to go do that. Then fast forward a few weeks later, I'm at the movie theater with my kids, and I'm drinking. You know, they have beer in movie theaters now all over the place.
Yep.
Order like 2 to 3 beers, and I started to analyze that recently in my life and started to think about the occasions at which I drink. And that is fundamentally what's changed. Is it's very, very intentional. And I'll give you another example. I go now on these streaks where I won't drink for months at all, nothing. And then I'll have something when it feels like it's right for me. And one of those examples was I was doing a speaking gig in Banff in Canada. Unbelievable, beautiful. I literally, when I was a kid, like for my third grade recipe, I handed in fondue, which has like kirsch in it and alcohol. Like that was my recipe that went in the book, right? Like for the recipes that the kids sent, and everyone's like, "What is this? Like, why is your kid putting alcohol in there?" I guess that was that was the telltale sign back then. But at this hotel it has a fondue restaurant. Someone in Banff just got done speaking at this fondue restaurant. I sit down with my wife, just me and her, and there's wine pairing with it. And I thought about it, and I had so much pressure to continue this streak that I'm like, you know what? How am I going to feel tomorrow? What am I going to think about tomorrow? And that is the lens that I put on everything now. Am I going to regret that I did this? Or am I going to feel okay about it? And I was like, you know what? If I don't do this right now with my wife, I think I'm going to regret it, honestly. Like I had that feeling. Now, I would have been fine either way, but I did not wake up that next day regretting that I had broke my streak and I had some wine because it was very controlled. And that is my life today. Quite frankly, the places where I drink alcohol are when it is the right occasion and when I need to take my mind off of work, which I get obsessed with what we do to the point where I go home and for fun, this is what I do. Like I'll go and code or I'll go look at something. I'll go obsess. I'll go down a tunnel like learning about the latest UGC content I should post on Instagram for ads that I'm doing and look at ROAS and like I just really get into the branding and the marketing side of the business, thinking about new concepts, ideas, beers. It just doesn't stop. What I found is when I have a drink that's very planned, my mind doesn't go there for a period of time, which you can see as a detriment when you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to create a business because if you're doing that often, your mind isn't going to the right places. That's the only thing, that's the only reason why I drink, or those very seldom occasions where it's like in Banff, where it's just like feels okay, safe place, and there's no consequence. But my kids to date have never seen me intoxicated to date, and that's a far cry from how I grew up, and I want to keep it that way.
Love it. I love it. Well, and it reminds me on a probably a heavier note, on a lighter note, I was told years ago by someone of like, no matter how dialed in you get with your nutrition, don't ever be the dad who won't have your kid's birthday cake because it's not on your macros, or
Mhm.
the guy who your best friend wife just left him and he's like, I just need a beer and talk to somebody, and you won't go have a beer with him. He was like, having a perfect nutrition is not about like those points in life, those specific moments, like, am I going to regret doing this tomorrow, is a great filter to have those questions to ask around those certain things. So I really appreciate your vulnerability sharing that. I think that's really important. And I also think it's just helpful for everybody, right? That relationship with alcohol, everybody's is different, but being
So
able to
personal.
ask that lens, yeah, it's so personal. And being able to ask that lens though of, is this a decision I'm going to regret tomorrow, helps in that moment, which is, it's always our hardest, right? Making the right decision for tomorrow today, because the pull is always what's more comfortable. So I appreciate you sharing
It,
that. What's, go ahead.
to answer the second part of your question too
Yeah.
quickly
Yeah.
was like, how did I balance that with being a founder of an NA company? Two things. From day one, we were making low and no alcohol. So I thought having a low alcohol brand would be good too. The issue is I didn't really have anywhere to sell it because you can't sell it online like I could sell at
Yep.
NA online. I didn't have retail relationships then, and we could just sell out of our tap room. So we were having all this beer sit around. It just didn't make sense when I had all these other channels. The second thing is 80% of our customers are moderate drinkers. There's a 15% or so that are completely sober. And I, quite frankly, when I got in this space, I didn't even think folks that are sober would be our would be a market for us because I thought it would be against what they can do being sober. So
Yeah.
it was just like a thing I thought was taboo. And what I realized is, to your point, everyone's on a spectrum. Like we're all on these spectrums, and we all your relationship with alcohol is like DNA. It's all unique. It's all different, and that is an amazing community that I found that love to partake in NA beer. But I also found people that are sober that won't even touch it, and that's great too. But most of our clientele is like myself, and are like most of my friends that drink it on occasion, but not often.
Yeah, well, and that's what I mean. That's where I am with it, right? I enjoy a good martini with my wife. I enjoy a glass of whiskey with friends or tequila. But what I appreciate is still, as you talked about, the ritual aspect, like 5 o'clock end of the workday, Monday night. Let me have one of the goes. Let me drink this. I'm gonna feel better in the morning. I'm gonna be fine for a 5 a.m. wake up to go hit the airport. Like all of the positive benefits, or even just I laughed a couple of years ago, like Sundays or Saturdays or Sunday college football. Like if your team's playing early at 11, you're sitting there drinking, like that kind of ruins the rest of your day. But if you're
Yeah.
like, hey, let me throw some of these let me throw some NAs in the cooler. I'm going to drink some NAs before the game. You go into the game a different spirit, but you feel better throughout the day. And so that's where I appreciate as well of having that option, so you don't have to. And from anybody from a social standpoint, like you still have something in hand. For me, it's like having something in hand, even if it's an empty can. You right, you're sitting there socializing, but having that non-alcoholic option that just blends in, it takes away some of the social stigma that people feel or hesitant to not drink alcohol gives you.
Yeah, and I think that stigma is gone now. Or people don't look at, for most people, I should say, don't look at NA beer as this weird foreign thing anymore.
Yeah.
It's becoming like a cool discovery moment of people talking about the brands they like, the styles they like. And I'm so proud to be a part of that movement right now. And it's been a blessing to be able to do that. But I will say the one thing about alcohol that is the most unfortunate thing is that it tricks your body and mind into like this recency effect, if I can explain it as such, in
Okay.
that when you have beer, like when I have a beer, let's say I'm gonna partake in the ritual. I'm sorry, not the ritual, but I'm gonna partake in having a beer for those reasons I mentioned.
Yeah.
The issue is the next day, the feeling I get is so much greater to want a beer the very next day than it would be otherwise. And that is something that I don't think is fully understood or talked about. That is something that's such a struggle. So I find that going on these longer streaks are really helpful, because if I just sporadically, drink once or twice a week, it's that it creates this habit where then your body is going to want it more and more frequent, and you can't control that. That's the shitty thing. It's like it's a drug, and it is making you addicted to it. And that is why it's easier for me to abstain from a period of time, because man, that next day is hard, and the next day is hard, a little less hard, and the day after that's a little less hard than that day, and eventually it fades out and it becomes easy, and you wake up and you're like, I feel amazing. Like, why don't I always do this? And then the day you have your drink, the next day you're going to want one, and you got to fade out from that.
That's a fascinating way to look at it, and something I hadn't even considered before as well, but it's accurate, right? You and I'd be interested as the science, more science comes out about why we are that way and why our bodies tend to do that, or our brains crave it that next day. But to your point, it's, I think the 75 days, as you talked about, 75 hard, which I know a lot of our listeners have done, and we're coming up right now and in the next couple weeks on Sober October, as Joe Rogan and those guys talk about, and Dry January is around the corner, of opportunities to just completely cut everything out for those listening, and just challenge yourself. And maybe you'll keep it running. Maybe it'll be, hey, I'm going to do October all the way into November until Thanksgiving, just to kind of push it. And then I'll have a glass of wine at Thanksgiving. Maybe I want to reset. But I think those are some good ways to start understanding, to your point, how am I responding the next day? Am I craving it more the next day? Am I okay? Or am I starting to catch myself justifying at 5 o'clock why I deserve one today? And if I do catch that, where do I need to redirect my behaviors and focus? So, Joe, man, this was really insightful. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on. For all of our listeners that haven't seen us posting enough about it, where's the best place to go online and order some great NA beer? And then also to follow along your journey, because I know you and the team help promote and talk about all the things you're doing and as you're traveling around.
Yeah, GoBrewing.com is the website. You can, first and foremost, go to our locator, see if the beer is near you. We are going to be in 19 states by the end of this year. We're in about 10 now, so chances are we can be relatively close to you in major chains, bars, restaurants, and so forth. If we're not, you can purchase directly from our website and on Amazon as well. And then we're on Instagram, LinkedIn. My tag is Joe Chura, Joechura, and at Go Brewing everywhere.
Love it, love it. And then if anybody's asking, for my friends in Texas, as you're asking, you can get it shipped right here, because I've got it shipped quite frequently in my garage fridge. That's it. Yeah. That's it. It's sitting in my garage fridge. It's a great thing for the weekend afternoon, man. Joe, this was fun, man. I appreciate you coming on the show this week.